cities. They enjoyed themselves through the gift relationship, not through a market relationship. They enjoyed themselves with their own dances and their own festivals and their own customs and their own holidays and their own picnics and their own play. And it was essentially free. It was the gift relationship interacting with nature. Foundation of life's pleasures. When I read this, I remembered how my mother taught us environmentalism without even using the word. It was one day, a beautiful spring day in our backyard in Connecticut, small town in Connecticut, and the whole family was there, 4 children, father, mother, and my mother started a process of questions that we wondered, what is she doing? And she said, how much are a dozen eggs? And how much are 5 pounds of potatoes? And how much is a loaf of bread? We wondered, what is she asking us these questions for? My dad had a restaurant, bakery, delicatessen. We knew all the answers to how much food costs in the stores. Well, when she finished the list, and we had all the right answers to that, then she shifted and she said, you hear the birds singing? How much does that cost? You see our apple tree? How much does that cost? Isn't it nice, the breeze, in this sunny day? How much does that breeze cost? And she looked up at the sun and she said, what does the sun cost these days? And we were a little confused, depending on our age. But we got the message and we never forgot it. There are things that should never be for sale. Never be for sale. And it's not just education or government or elections that should never be for sale. It's that precious biosphere that's 3 miles around the Earth, circle of life, about 3 miles, where all life is sustained. Now I'd like to shift to what happens when there's real specialization. What happens with real specialization, and we're the most specialized society in the history of the world. You no longer just have biologists, you have microbiologists, you have molecular biologists, you have plant biologists, and under plant biologists you have subspecialties. And that's true in the law, and that's true in engineering, and that's true in business. All of the categories that people would decide where they're going to work in 100 years ago, 50 years ago, now there are subcategories and subcategories. And what happens there is you lose sight of an integrated view of life. You lose sight that you're responsible for integrated view of life. I once spent a summer at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, and the issue of nuclear power, of course, was quite prominent. They were projecting 1,000 nuclear plants in the United States by the year 2000. This was in the 1960s that they were predicting this. We have about 110, by the way. There hasn't been a new nuclear plant licensed and built in our country since 1973. And it was interesting to see, there were 1,000 scientists at this government laboratory in Tennessee. When you try to talk about nuclear power as hazard, the physicists would say, well, we're not biologists, so we can't really talk about the effects of radiation. And then the biologists would say, well, we're not physicists, so we really cannot deal with the likelihood of a meltdown or a nuclear power accident, or whether the containment structure can take a direct hit by a large airplane or suffer the effects of an earthquake. And after a while, you know, nobody had the whole picture. And they all basically escaped by saying, well, I just know a lot about this, but I don't know much about anything else. Now this is where the civic culture comes in. The civic culture has to bring all these pieces together and say, what kind of policy are we going to have on energy? Shouldn't we really have the kind of energy that does not get us into wars, bloody wars that we promote? Should we have the kind of energy that protects our descendants? Should we kind of have the kind of energy that is plentiful in supply? Should we have the kind of energy that we can use as homeowners and as consumers with solar systems on our homes, or small businesses can use? Or should we have the kind of energy that destroys, the energy of death, the energy of cancer, the energy of respiratory ailments, the energy of property devaluation, the energy of uninhabitable territory like around Chernobyl for miles and miles and miles as the radioactivity recycles itself? Should we have the kind of energy that results in concentrated political power to serve the perpetuation of that kind of fossil fuels and nuclear power? Should we have the kind of energy that can be manipulated in terms of its supply and can be subjected to monopoly and cartels and spikes in prices that destabilize economies? Should we have the kind of energy that can destroy whole ecology, like the damage from Exxon Valdez, the damage in the Niger Delta, horrific, devastating damage to human beings, flora, fauna, and water in Nigeria, or the BP spill, or possibly one or two nuclear Class 9 meltdowns, which would contaminate an area half the size of France, according to the Atomic Energy Commission calculations in the 1950s. They said a major nuclear meltdown could contaminate an area the size of Pennsylvania. You know what that means? That means that there's radioactive material in all the soil. It'll be there forever. It will be recycled, the wind will blow it, more cancers, more stillbirths. The Russian scientists who have relentlessly put the studies together on Chernobyl in a new book that came out a couple years ago. The devastation from Chernobyl is totally massive. It's one of the greatest disasters in the history of mankind. Over 1 million deaths so far. And it keeps coming, and it keeps coming, and the leukemia keeps increasing, and so forth. And that's just one nuclear plant. So it's clear which choice we go. We go with the renewable energy, and we go with energy efficiency. The idea that we have to build nuclear plants or coal plants in our world today, when we are wasting 80–90% of our energy with gas guzzling motor vehicles, electric generating plants that waste enormous heat that is not recycled, the kind of consumption where you have things in the stores that have a package which are inside another package which are made of plastics. The problem of where do you dump the stuff? One of our former workers put out a very good popular book in the United States called The Story of Stuff. And she starts with the waste, with the solid waste, the liquid waste, and then traces back to analyze the whole society where waste is bad for the consumer, but it's very profitable for the seller. If you have a car that doesn't get much mileage per liter, you're going to have to buy more gasoline. And the oil companies like that. And that's the system they've established in the United States. We actually had more fuel-efficient cars in the 1930s, before high-compression engines came in. And then we went down to 12 to 13 miles per gallon average fuel efficiency for General Motors cars in 1973, and now we're back up to maybe 24 miles per gallon just think of the waste and the impact. What's also important to start looking at is to turn products into services. So you have to use less products. In our country today, there's a new company that started up. It has a zip car. So if you need a car for 3 hours, you can go to a certain location in Washington, D.C. and just rent it. So it's even more micro than rental cars, where you usually rent a car for a day or 5 days or a week or a month or a year. Now you can rent it for an hour, or you can rent it for 3 hours. So there's nothing particularly new about the concept, because mass transit is that. Public transit is in effect reducing the need for motor vehicles by having a more efficient service called public transit. And increasingly what we're going to see is fewer products needed to be produced because of different kinds of sharing businesses, sharing between neighbors and sharing products, so that not everyone has to buy their own this and buy their own that. You see a neighborhood in the United States suburb, everybody has their power lawnmower. How often is that power lawnmower used? It could be used for the entire street. So there's more and more of a trend of that. And if it's not cooperation, it's basically commercial. It'll be done as a business. Now, the concept of scarcity drives environmental sanity, like the old farmers. What is our moral equivalent of scarcity in a society of abundance? It's called ecology. In the third world, if you talked about abundance, people would laugh at it. 1 million children die from contaminated water, the lack of safe water. People starve, people are undernourished. 2 billion people live on $2 or $1 a day. So they have their own kind of scarcity. But if it isn't channeled in rational ways, using old and new knowledge, here's what happens. You get deforestation. People have to have fuel. They start cutting down more and more trees. Then you get erosion. Then you get landslides. Then you get soil in the water. And you get human tragedies and deaths. And that has happened in countries all over the third world. So what we have to do is recognize the genius of people in the third world. Get off their backs. Get the West out of their backyard. Get rid of the new forms of colonialism, the new forms of invasion and incursion, the consistent support of dictators in the third world by Western countries, especially the United States, that oppress their people and suffocate their genius. And let them tell us how they can resolve the problems of scarcity and how they are going to deal with increasing abundance. They have taught us how to do advanced literacy programs. Brazil, Paulo Freire. They've taught us how to build homes for poor Egyptian peasants in the soil under their feet. They've taught us micro-lending that has started millions of small businesses, many of them among women in villages in Bangladesh, in rural areas in Bangladesh, which is now spreading into the United States, by the way. We now have micro-lending in the United States for smaller businesses. That's what we have to do. The neem tree in India is a marvel of ecology. It was a free gift from nature. It has many, many uses, and Monsanto is on its back. And now it's trying to synthesize, it has been, other companies, so they can patent it, monopolize it, and then license it back to the very Indian people who once used it free. And the same is being done for seeds. This is the kind of new colonialism that's ours. A few years ago, 1 million Indian farmers, 1 million, rallied in a march against bioengineered, patented seeds that